Step 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. In taking the fourth step, we begin to know ourselves for who we really are. Building on the foundation of the first 3 steps, we take stock of the feelings and patterns that have shaped our lives. We come to realize that our addiction is more than just unmanageable sexual activities. It includes an entire system of underlying thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. If we neglect this inventory, we risk being stuck in our old habits and mistaken beliefs, and our unexamined defects of character will eventually lead us to relapse. By looking honestly at our moral nature, the failings that kept us trapped in our addiction, as well as our virtues and aspirations, we start to move away from being self-centered and towards being God-centered. The fourth step takes courage because we are gradually giving up our old rationalizations, dishonesty, and self-pity in order to discover the truth about who we are. In the process, most of us find ourselves peeling away many layers of denial. Our distorted view of ourselves led us to avoid responsibility for our actions. Our denial about our addictive behaviors prevented us from seeing our faults. At the same time, our belief that we were horrible people kept us from believing we could ever change or be deserving of a better life. In taking the fourth step, we become willing to challenge these old ways of thinking and examine ourselves in a new clarity. A searching and fearless moral inventory is one of the means by which we open ourselves to the care and healing of our higher power. It is one of the first and most profound ways we put our third step decision into action. As we work step 4, we practice honesty, courage, and faith, keeping in mind that others have walked this path before us and found their recovery strengthened through this work. A moral inventory can be described as a systematic examination of all beliefs, feelings, attitudes, and actions that have shaped our lives from our earliest years. It is a careful survey of how we have responded to people, circumstances, and the world around us. An inventory allows us to go over our lives methodically and objectively, reevaluating assumptions, beliefs, and feelings that we have held onto for years, but perhaps never examined or questioned. In making this inventory, we take special care to identify these aspects of our character that have caused harm to ourselves and others, so as to bring them forward for healing and change in later steps. The fourth step inventory is a written inventory. If we merely say it aloud or think about it, it is too easy to miss or ignore important things. All inventories have to be recorded in some way in order to be accurate. Imagine trying to take inventory of all the merchandise in a store without writing anything down. In the same way, our inventory needs to be documented in order to be useful. The written inventory serves as a snapshot of the current state of our moral being and allows us to get an accurate, realistic perspective on ourselves, perhaps for the very first time. We may also draw on this inventory for reference when working step 5 through 9. Experience has shown that it is helpful to work this step one small amount at a time without trying to rush the process. Most of us cannot write a thorough fourth step in one sitting. There is too much work to do, and we need time to reflect on our work as we do it. If we break the step down into manageable pieces, all we need to do is focus on the piece in front of us. The support of others in doing this work is essential. While making our inventory, we stay in close contact with our sponsor and our friends in the fellowship. A sponsor can help us pace our work and keep us on track, encourage us to explore new areas, or give us permission to move on when we are stuck. or our fifth step as part of the fourth step process. We may also share parts of our inventory with our sponsor as we go along. There is no single format that is used by all members in their inventories. We work closely with our sponsor to discover what kind of writing we need to do and what form of inventory is most effective for us. The common element is that we write about a number of aspects of our lives that, when put together, give us an honest picture of ourselves, including our shortcomings. Our inventory is searching because we try to examine ourselves as thoroughly and painstakingly as possible. It is fearless because we don't let our fear stop us from digging deeper. It is moral because it concerns our values and the consequences of our actions for ourselves and others. Examining our sexual conduct is an important aspect of our inventory. While in our first step, we examine the patterns of our sexual behavior and disclose specific instances, here we explore more deeply our sexual history and look at every instance in which our sexual behavior directly or indirectly harmed others or ourselves. We look at whom we hurt, what we did specifically to hurt them, and why we did it. In the process, we may uncover the secret agendas, fantasies, beliefs, and rationalizations contributing to our behavior. While violating others sexually is an obvious example of a harm done, we also acknowledge that using people for our sexual exploits, violating trust, committing infidelity, lying and covering up our behaviors, manipulating others covertly or overtly, and taking advantage of others by using power or authority are other ways we may have caused harm. We may also examine our traumatic sexual experiences or sexual abusive relationships and their effects on ourselves and others. Clarity, honesty, and self-disclosure are essential as we explore each instance. We take full and unequivocal responsibility for what we've done. Even if we were co-partners in sexual misdeeds, in working step 4, we focus only on our part. We look honestly at defects that drove our behavior, such as selfishness, desire for control, an attitude of entitlement, or feelings of inferiority or superiority. We also inventory our resentments. For sex addicts, resentment is one of the most stubborn obstacles in our spiritual growth. Resentment means holding on to old hurts, anger, and grudges. When we cling to hurt or anger, we get a negative attitude. We feel victimized. And each time we play the event over in our minds, we feel victimized again. From the victim attitude, we often slip into an attitude of entitlement. If life is unfair, we are entitled to get what we need and want by any means necessary. So feeling entitled, we play by a different set of rules. We lower our moral standards to allow ourselves to get our fair share. We use dishonesty, blaming others, manipulation, or theft to even the score. In our inventory, we list the people and situations that have hurt us, citing specific instances. We list what resentments we hold against people and why, trying to identify exactly what they did instead of writing in generalities. Many of us write about how we felt when we were hurt and how we feel now. We may list what we think was lost, taken, or threatened by another person's actions. Some of us have also listed resentments against society or certain institutions. We also write about our blame of others, how we believe their actions have harmed us and affected our lives for the worse. We may find ourselves feeling uncomfortable about this, but it is important to write honestly about our feelings, even if they seem unreasonable. We then go back over the list of resentments, looking at each incident, and ask ourselves what role we played in the situation. We must take responsibility for our part, however small. Sometimes, especially for resentments from childhood, We determined we had no role in the problem at all. When we review the resentments from our adult lives, however, we discover, often to our surprise, that we've almost always contributed in some way to the troubles that have best us. When looking at the actions of others, for instance, we need to ask ourselves, what is it about their actions that may have been a response to something I said or did? A sponsor can help us sort this out and see where we need to take responsibility and where we need to let go of carrying responsibility for the actions of others. When we review our responsibility in conflicts, we see the pattern of our character defects emerge. Character defects are flaws in our moral nature that prevent us from aligning ourselves with God's will. They are expressions of our willfulness. These defects include dishonesty, selfishness, self-centeredness, lack of humility, grandiosity, pessimism, the desire to control everything around us, or any other shortcoming that we see coming up again and again in our relationships with others. For example, if we repeatedly got into conflict with people because of jealousy, we list jealousy as one of our character defects. In our inventory, we do our best to list whatever such defects we can identify. We will refer to our list of character defects later in steps 6 and 7. In the same way that we write about our sexual conduct and resentments, we may inventory other emotions and behavior patterns in our lives. Examples of troubling emotions that bring out our character defects may include fear, envy, loneliness, shame, embarrassment, or self-hatred. This list may not fit for everyone, and we may inventory other patterns instead. Our sponsor can help us narrow or broaden our focus as needed. Our emotions have often been a source of pain and confusion in our lives, and they frequently triggered our addictive sexual behavior. We may have acted out whenever we experienced anger, fear, anxiety, or even joy, rather than responding to these emotions in a healthy way. We also may notice that our feelings increase in intensity when we stop acting out. In taking inventory, we may write about the many ways that these feelings have ruled our lives, using specific examples from our experience. We strive to isolate and recognize each feeling to the best of our ability, and we practice acceptance of all our emotions rather than denying or fearing them. In each case, we search for the defects of character revealed by our emotional unmanageability, as well as giving ourselves credit for the times we were responsible, caring, and appropriate with our emotional responses. If we find ourselves hesitating, we turn to our higher power for help, trusting that with God's care we cannot fail. In the case of fear, we may write about times in which we risked our lives, health, careers, or relationships, while denying that we were in danger. We can list the ways in which we have been handicapped by our fears, how fear motivated actions that we later regretted, how it prevented us from achieving the things we desired, or how the fear of intimacy and commitment contributed to our loneliness. Many of us have found that fear was a pervasive influence throughout our lives, profoundly affecting our beliefs, our relationships, and our self-worth. Yet, we also need to credit ourselves for the times when we have been courageous, the times we felt fear but still did what was worthwhile or healthy for us. In writing about envy, we may look at all the ways we compare our insides with the outsides of others. We might list the things others have that we think we're lacking, write about our responsibility for not pursuing these goals, and then list the things in our lives for which we are grateful. When examining loneliness, we may write about the ways in which we have isolated ourselves. If we keep ourselves too busy to have friends or otherwise avoid intimate contact, we note that. We list the ways we have avoided emotional intimacy with those closest to us, and we list the ways we still avoid it. If we have kept secrets or kept parts of our lives hidden, we record that as well. We may want to write down the things we've done that brought us shame or embarrassment. Although embarrassing events might seem trivial, we sometimes feel as much embarrassment as if the events happened yesterday. We can also list the things we feel guilty about. We look at things we did that we knew were wrong and about which we feel remorse. And we write down any secrets that we feel ashamed about, or other events that bring up shame when we recall them. These painful events and feelings must come to light if we are to continue on our path of recovery. As long as they remain secret, they have the power to lead us back to our addiction. We may inventory self-hatred by listing the things we've done that we feel we cannot accept or forgive ourselves for. These are the things time does not seem to heal. We look at the ways we let ourselves down. We list the resentments we hold against ourselves. We record the things about ourselves that we don't like or that we wish were different. We write about how we have acted in self-hating ways, listing the ways that we've abused our bodies, our emotions, and our spirits. We look at how we have neglected our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual needs. We examine the ways in which we allowed others to abuse us and treat us poorly. We list the negative things we believe about ourselves and the abusive messages we tell ourselves. We look for the patterns in our self-hating behaviors, trying to identify the character defects underlying them. A moral inventory wouldn't be complete without some acknowledgement of our positive aspects. We list the ways we have acted in a self-loving manner. We may write about the friendships we have nurtured and the people we have helped. We list the things we are genuinely proud of, such as healthy accomplishments that we worked hard to achieve. We write about our love, faith, and gratitude. We give ourselves credit for the success we have had at turning our addiction over to our higher power. We need to remember that our fourth step is uninventory, not the inventory. We may always return to our inventory when we need to. We may have only been ready to face certain truths about ourselves when we first worked the step. We may work a fourth step again when we have new challenges to face, or when we need to examine ourselves more closely. There is no one right inventory, and there are no perfect inventories. Completing step 4 is a major milestone in our recovery. To complete it, we need patience, persistence, honesty, and courage. It takes support, for we do our fourth step with the help of our higher power, our sponsor, and our group. And it takes gentleness in the form of self-care. By completing this step, we show a commitment to our recovery and to living in reality. Now, after gaining much hard-won insight into ourselves, it is time to open up and share our truth. And in this sharing, help make our recovery secure. It is time for step 5. Step 5. Admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Each step of the program is a leap of faith that moves us forward in our recovery. After completing our moral inventory, we are challenged in step 5 to take another leap. We now need to admit the whole truth we have discovered to God, to ourselves, and to another person. Working the 5th step helps relieve us of the burden of our secrets, break through our isolation, and face ourselves honestly in a way we cannot do alone. With the 5th step, we come out into the open. As active sex addicts, we hid who we were and what we were doing from others, but also from ourselves. We take the fifth step when we come out of hiding, let go of self-deception, and acknowledge our reliance on a higher power. Our belief that we were isolated, estranged from the care of a loving God, had kept us in fear. Now, breaking fear of secrecy, we admit our wrongs in the light of our relationship with the God of our understanding. If we trust, we will be given the power to acknowledge our shortcomings. Admitting our wrongs to God opens the door to change within ourselves. We have found that God will help us find the courage and honesty we need in order to work this step. Although we have recorded a detailed inventory in the fourth step, it is a different thing altogether to admit the truth to ourselves. We need to be careful to acknowledge the exact nature of our wrongs inwardly so that denial can give way to acceptance. Sharing our inventory with another human being helps in this process. When we hear ourselves admitting our wrongs to someone, explaining all of the details out loud, our past begins to make more sense, and we can start to view our lives with more clarity. As the reality of our shortcomings sinks in, we can bring them in humility to our higher power. Our deepest acceptance comes when we know that the God of our understanding loves us no matter what we have done. In the fifth step, we reveal our secrets to another person, many of us for the very first time. Despite our commitment to the program, we often find ourselves feeling afraid at this point. We can expect to be judged harshly and rejected if we tell someone our secrets, especially those acting out behaviors of which we are most ashamed. These fears are only natural, but we cannot allow them to prevent us from taking this step. We call on our higher power for strength and for the willingness to share our story. We discover that the person hearing our fifth step will not reject us, but will often respect us for our honesty and courage, and love us all the more. We pick someone we trust to hear our inventory. Most of us share our fifth step with our sponsor. Some of us choose a friend in the program, a therapist, a spiritual advisor, or another wise confidant with whom we feel safe. It is best to take this step with the help of a person who has worked the step in his or her own recovery, and who already knows and accepts us unconditionally. We do not take the fifth step with our partners, parents, or families. This is not the time for selfish confessions. We need time in the program and the help of experienced members before we can judge what to reveal to our families or those closest to us. Admitting our wrongs means admitting all the ways in which we were dishonest, unfair, abusive, inconsiderate, unjust, or unethical. Our wrongs include all the ways we broke the rules to get ahead or to avoid consequences we didn't want to face. They may also include actions we neglected to take, as well as ones we took. We admit our wrongs in a detailed and thorough way. We describe what we did, when we did it, and what we were thinking or feeling when we did it. We describe what the consequences were for ourselves and for others. Many of us tell the story of each wrong rather than simply listing them. In the process, we re-examine situations in which we may have seen ourselves as the victim or minimized our wrongful actions. Striving for thoroughness, we admit all the wrongs we can remember, not just those related to our acting out. Most importantly, we admit the character defects that motivated our actions, such as pride, envy, selfishness, or greed. These defects or failings are the exact nature of our wrongs. They are those aspects of temperament that hold back our spiritual growth and keep us locked in self-defeating habits, attitudes, and beliefs. We have found that admitting these defects is essential to experiencing a positive breakthrough in our relations with others and with ourselves. This may seem like a very difficult task. We should not lose heart. During the 5th step, our sponsor will often share his or her own experiences with us, letting us know about similar actions, feelings, and shortcomings. Knowing that others feel the way we do and have done some of the same kinds of things helps to relieve us of our shame and isolation. Our sponsor supports us emotionally as we face the most painful parts of ourselves, allowing us to look at our wrongs without flinching. Although the 5th step focuses on admitting the exact nature of our wrongs, it is also very helpful to acknowledge the good things about ourselves. Admitting the ways we have been caring, resourceful, and talented helps us get a balanced picture of the whole of our moral nature. By acknowledging our character assets, and with our sponsor's encouragement, we establish a foundation on which our further recovery can be built. While we might wish to share our entire 5th step in one sitting, some of us may in fact need several meetings to complete the entire step. Once we start, we make a commitment to finish it. We are often emotionally vulnerable while working this step, so we want to be sure to complete it in a timely fashion and to get some extra support. With the help of our higher power and support from our sponsor and others, we face our pain without becoming consumed by it. Once we finish step 5, the rewards will prove to have been worth the effort. When we finish step 5, it may feel as though a great burden has been lifted from our shoulders. Many of us feel a sense of wholeness and integrity for the very first time. We have acknowledged and taken responsibility for the whole of our being, to ourselves, our fellow addict, and our higher power. The acceptance we receive is a profound spiritual experience. Having gained a greater faith in the love and care of the God of our understanding, it is now time to take a good look at our character defects in the light of our relationship with God. Our new awareness leads to a desire for change. Go on to step 6. Step 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Wanting our lives to change is not the same as being actually ready for change. The negative patterns uncovered in our inventory represent a lifetime of ingrained beliefs, attitudes, and habits of behavior. Just becoming aware of them can be painful. Imagining life without them may seem almost impossible. Much of our resistance to change is based in fear. We may find it easier to continue in an unhappy yet familiar way of life than to face an unknown and uncertain future. For many of us, our problems and shortcomings seem to define us as people. What would we be without them? Often we find that our character defects started as ways to deal with difficult circumstances in childhood or later. It is hard to let go of beliefs and behaviors that once helped us cope, or even kept us alive. If we are fearful, we can gently and courageously allow ourselves to consider the possibility of surrendering our familiar defects, trusting that our higher power will not give us more than we can handle. Character defects are undesirable traits, attitudes, and beliefs that make our lives unmanageable, cause pain to others, and block our spiritual growth. Our problems did not begin with our sex addiction, nor do they end when we get into recovery. Step 6 builds on the recognition that our malady has roots that run deeper than just our acting out behavior. It requires the willingness to change fundamentally, to be free of the failings that continue to create serious problems in our lives. Most of us are well aware of our worst character defects long before we get to this step. If we rage, are uncontrollably jealous, are full of resentments, or feel like a doormat, We probably have had some sense of how these patterns have poisoned our lives and relationships. But rather than solving these problems or accepting our lives, we have hunkered down into our addiction. In the 6th step, we become open to the possibility that God can remove the defects we had felt helpless to control and had masked with our acting out. In working this step, we have found it helpful to refer to the list of character defects we made in our Step 4 inventory, and perhaps expanded with the help of our sponsor when we took Step 5. Our list includes all the self-defeating attitudes and behavior patterns that have been revealed to us. Examples of unhealthy attitudes may include resentment, grandiosity, self-pity, perfectionism, blaming others, feeling like a victim, and entitlement. Our list of behaviors might include habitual actions such as raging, isolating from others, lying, manipulating, or avoiding conflict. We may also have noted our negative traits or approaches to life, such as greed, envy, selfishness, and self-hatred. It is important to realize that the words, "these defects of character," refer to the exact nature of our wrongs, admitted in Step 5. In Step 6, we focus on those defects that have come to our attention through our inventory work. We may see, for example, that our expectations of others have led to disappointment and resentment. We may notice that our perfectionism caused us to procrastinate rather than complete a task imperfectly. We may remember instances when our stubbornness, judgmental attitudes, or self-righteousness produce conflict with other people. Looking at areas of unmanageability in our lives can help us recognize our defects when we identify our responsibility for events that felt painful or out of control. We can also look at where we've been stuck, areas in our lives that repeatedly gave us trouble. If, for instance, we are the kind of person who won't commit to things, we can recognize this defect in the pattern of problems we have had, such as not staying long in any one job or jumping from one relationship to another. We look for those aspects of our personality that hold us back in life, whatever they might be. We can ask our sponsor and friends in recovery for help in identifying our character defects. We can ask them to tell us when they see us making choices that are not in our best interest. They can tell us where we seem to be repeating the same mistakes. Often, they will point out the situations that cause us trouble, rather than tell us directly what they think our problems are. It is also helpful to ask our higher power to reveal our character defects to us. When we pray or meditate on this step, new insights about ourselves and our shortcomings will often come to us. As sex addicts, we may find that our character defects take the form of unhealthy beliefs and attitudes about sex. These defects may include believing that sex is inherently bad or wrong, or that sex is incompatible with being religious, spiritual, or good. Having difficulty telling the difference between sex and love, or understanding how they relate to each other. Having feelings of sexual inadequacy or shame, while avoiding healthy sexual risks. And having feelings of sexual entitlement, or associating sex with power and control. If we have been victims of sexual trauma or abuse, we may feel stuck in the role of either victim or perpetrator, repeatedly reenacting abusive patterns, or we may avoid sex for fear of being victimized again or becoming perpetrators ourselves. In taking this step, we acknowledge that many of our feelings, thoughts, and patterns around sex are beyond our ability to manage and won't disappear overnight. Our part is to become willing and ready for our higher power to move us toward healthier ways of being with our sexuality. We may feel as powerless over our defects as we did over our addictive sexual behaviors. Yet, if we are unwilling to let go of our defects, we risk being led back into our addiction. Our Step 4 inventory revealed to us how defects such as resentment, self-centeredness, and self-pity led us time and again into our addictive behaviors. By becoming ready to relinquish our defects, we show our willingness to do what it takes to stay abstinent. Becoming entirely ready involves a deeper commitment to recovery, a willingness to let God of our understanding affect important changes within us, changes in our ways of thinking and feeling, changes in our behavior. The readiness in the 6th step is one of the practical results of our 3rd step decision to turn our will and life over to God's care. For our higher power's will to work in our lives, we must be willing to let it work. If we feel that we are not yet willing, we can pray to become ready to have these defects removed. Although there is no perfect, infallible way of knowing that we are entirely ready, we will know when our doubts and reservations are no longer blocking our way. Many of us had tried to purge ourselves of our worst traits, and our efforts failed. Just as our attempts to be free of our addiction failed, we may have tried vows and resolutions, or adopted beliefs or practices designed for self-improvement, only to see our defects manifesting again despite good intentions. We wondered how God could remove our character defects. But we need not concern ourselves with this in order to work Step 6. All we have to do is become willing and leave the rest to our higher power. On the other side of every character defect is a character asset. Part of the process of becoming entirely ready is to practice these character assets in our actions and choices instead of our defects. If we suffer from emotional rigidity, we can look for ways to become more flexible. If we are perfectionists, overly self-critical, or impatient, we can practice acceptance. Practicing new ways of behavior can help open our hearts to the spiritual changes God wants for us. The prospect of having lifelong habits removed may seem overwhelming. We have learned that the 6th step is not a single event, but an ongoing process. We do not need to be willing to have all of our defects removed at once. We can concentrate on being ready to have 1 or 2 debilitating character traits removed first. And just as we stop acting out one day at a time, we can allow ourselves to be ready for changes in our character one day at a time. When we see ourselves reacting to a situation in an old way, we can try handling it differently for one day. We will never know perfection, but we can experience progress. As we let go of old ways of approaching life and trust that God will reveal new ones, many of us begin to have a greater vision of what our life in recovery could be. We are ready for real change, and our attention now turns directly to our higher power so that we may ask in all humility for the help we need. It is time for Step 7.